Everybody, Rockets get a 119-110 win at home tonight over the New Orleans Pelicans. And really, the good news from this game is that Jabari Smith Jr., who has significantly struggled with his shot of late, after a really good run, goes through this 8-game stretch where he can't hit anything, comes out tonight, hits a career-high 7 3-point shots, scores 32 points to lead all scorers. And the Rockets come up with a big win on a night when they needed it from Jabari. Jabari kind of played the KD role tonight, and KD played the Jabari role from the last several games. And I'm here with the great Ben DuBose. You can follow him on Twitter at Ben DuBose, and you can read all of his stuff at Rockets Wire and on ClutchFans as well, ClutchFans.net. Ben, you were at the game. Obviously, I have, before I kick it to you, I have to tell you, like, the Jabari news is great. The Steven Adams news is the real thing that just casts a shadow over this game, where Steven Adams landed in the third, fourth quarter. I think maybe it was early fourth, where he landed on his left foot, and they're calling it a high ankle sprain, but it was non-contact when he landed. And they, Ime Udoka says nothing's broken, but there's a lot of pain, a lot of swelling. Obviously couldn't put weight on it, had to be helped off by two people into the locker room, which is going to loom large, because you've got the Spurs on deck and you've got plenty of other tough matchups coming up, and Steven Adams is a critical player for this team. So your thoughts?
Yeah, that's definitely a downer. With that said, I think if there's any way to overcome it in the short term, some people pointed to the availability of Clint Capella, and you can lean on him to take a few minutes here or there. But I think in terms of replacing the high impact Steven Adams minutes, the only real solution outside of when Sengun is your center is to go Jabari at the 5. And we actually saw that tonight in the fourth quarter with Jabari at the 5, DFS playing some at the 4. And I think DFS had 8 points, I believe, all in the fourth quarter. And those were instrumental in helping the Rockets finally get some separation and put this thing away. And to beat good teams, I mean, you've talked about it before. The superpower for the Rockets is the rebounding.
Yeah.
And Steven is enormously important in that. But you're not going to be able to replace that with Clint Capella, at least not on a super frequent basis. He can sop up minutes, but in terms of the high leverage ones against good teams in the second half, you certainly want Sengun to play well, stay out of foul trouble. But beyond that, I think this might be the point of the schedule that you try Jabari at the 5 a little bit more. And to see Jabari get going the way he did tonight, I think this was a really good mental health game for Jabari and for the team overall. They're now 25-15. So you're back 10 games over 500, which they hadn't been since midway through the 2 Portland games. They are now on pace to win 50-plus games. Tuesday against the Spurs will be the halfway point of the year, so you'll be on pace either to win 50 or 52. So it's a nice round number to be at. And Jabari, the guy who had struggled earlier this month when you went through that downturn, now he comes out on the other side. So anybody concerned that, he had lost it and was struggling to sort of regain his confidence, well, tonight he did that. And you can point out that the Pelicans aren't a good team. That's true, but the teams Jabari struggled against on that road trip, the Mavs, the Blazers, the Kings, they're not good either. Jabari's just at a point where he needed to see the ball go through the net, and tonight it did.
Yeah, and we'll definitely talk about Jabari for sure. To add to context to what you were saying, Ime was asked by Kelly Eco, shout out to Kelly for the question about, okay, if you are going to be without Steven Adams for a stretch, what are you looking at? Are you looking at playing Clint more? Are you looking at, going small? And he said, it's going to depend on the matchup. We got Clint for sort of this purpose, but he said specifically, I like that lineup that we had at the end, and that was Jabari at the 5. And, playing some of that some more, if I think about losing Steven Adams, I think it's a significant loss for the Houston Rockets, significant. But another part of that superpower is Amen Thompson. Like, as far as who is elite at applying that kind of rebounding pressure at his position. Now, he's not gonna fill the void of Steven Adams. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying those are the two elite sort of rebounders for their position that give the Rockets such an edge and create so many possessions. Tonight they did win the possession battle. I don't think the rebounding advantage grew at all when Adams went out. I think it stayed pretty. The Rockets did win the boards tonight by, I think, 12, but it was about that gap when he went out. Really the difference tonight was Jabari. We can talk about Sengun. I thought Sengun played really good in the second half. It was almost, for me, a lot like the Minnesota game, where he was just really terrible in the first half, and then the second half was really good. Same thing kind of with that Minnesota game. I think Sengun hit 8 of his last 9 shots, and he had a couple of shots where they were sort of, not the 2-foot layup variety, like a 8 to 12 foot turnaround fade or something along those lines. So he had it going on. It's just as you pointed out, you had to survive a night tonight where KD goes 5 of 18. I believe he's 1 of 8 from 3-point range. You're not going to see that very often.
No, not at all. And in some ways, it was fitting that the young guys, most notably Jabari and Amen, picked up the slack for KD when KD's been picking up the slack for them for weeks.
Yes, exactly.
Ime called them out after one of the Portland games for having to rely so much on a 37-year-old KD, where he has to play 40 minutes a night. And even the other night, it was nice to get the win over Minnesota, but KD had to go God mode to get that done over a Minnesota team that was without Anthony Edwards. And Jabari's been at the forefront of those struggles. So for him to do the heavy lifting for a change, yeah, it's fitting because this is a 3 and 4 night stretch. So KD, especially after doing what he did the other night, his tank was probably on empty a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So it was nice to see the other guys, the younger guys who should have a little more juice in these stretches with 3 games in 4 nights, pick up the slack for a change. And to close the loop on Jabari, I pulled up his season-long stats.
Yeah.
So after tonight, where he scored a season-high 32 points, I was sort of hoping that they'd let him get to 34, 35, which would have been a career high, but obviously they wanted to funnel the late game free throws to KD so that he could pass Dirk Nowitzki to get to 6th all-time in NBA scoring. I get it. Nonetheless, it's a season high for Jabari, made 7 3-pointers, and so that raises his 3-point shooting clip for the year back to 35.5. His true shooting clip for the season is about 54.5. And while it's not what it was 2.5 weeks ago, it's not that far off either. And that's what I want to remind people. We are only about 2.5 weeks removed from when Jabari was having, career best numbers across the board, when he was shooting about 38% from 3 on decent volume, when his true shooting percentage was about 57.5, just short of 58. Like, this was a guy who offensively was taking a clear step forward. We know the value he brings as a defender, as a connector, and then the bottom fell out. And that sucks, but the bottom fell out over 5 or 6 games. Well, we're not even to the halfway point of the year yet. We still have 42 games left to play in this regular season. So if he can get it going again, those numbers, while not what they were, they're not that far off from when 2.5 weeks ago we were talking about him having this breakthrough season. So while it's been frustrating, hopefully this is a catalyst, something to build off of, because, this is a big year for Jabari, year 4, 22 years old. But now also without Steven Adams, I think you're going to have to lean on Jabari a little bit more. And so to see him sort of build confidence and see the ball go through the net as much as he did tonight, that's big, because my suspicion, this is just me guessing, but I would be surprised if we see Steven Adams before the other side of the All-Star break. I just think
I agree,
because this is the second time he sprained that ankle. And this one, it already had some swelling, not even an hour after the injury when Ime Udoka talked to us post-game. I mean, that's not an injury you want to mess around with, especially because, as you've said, that is their superpower, the offensive rebounding. And so you want him to be ready for the playoffs. And if you wait until the other side of the All-Star break, you have a built-in bonus week in which you can get rest because there's no games. So you can sort of stack that on top of the 3 weeks that you have before the All-Star break. So my guess is that the Rockets play this conservatively. You give him, a month off, because at this point, this is not a season where you're going to chase down the 1 seed. We talked about it. This is one where you just want to get the best matchup you can and be in the best health you can getting to the playoffs. And even if you win, say, 50, you win 50 games instead of 55, if you're healthy and you're in peak form come April, you'll happily take that trade-off with this particular Rockets team. So I think they'll be conservative. And because they'll be conservative with Steven, that's why you need Jabari and also Dorian Finney-Smith. I want to hit that home again. Dorian taking a step forward is really big. Hopefully they get Tari back very soon. He's been listed as questionable the last 2 games. That's going to be all the more important now that there's no Steven Adams for a while.
Yeah, on both players. I'll talk about Adams a little bit more first. When we look at the Rockets and where they are record-wise versus where they are net rating-wise, the Rockets should be better. Their record should be better based on where they are net rating. But a lot of their net rating, or a good chunk of that, is really those Steven Adams minutes. And it's crazy the impact that he has when he's on the floor. Tonight they started double big. They were good. and played well. I'm really hopeful that I'll just put it this way. I thought it was something that could cost him his season. I thought it could possibly be Achilles. Yeah, I thought this, he couldn't even put weight on it right away. He was, in pain, and Steven Adams, high pain tolerance. I was quite nervous about that. This was much worse than a high ankle sprain, but I do agree with you. I would be stunned if he's back, before a month or something like that. I think it's going to take him beyond the All-Star break. As far as Jabari, look, Jabari's had lots of bad games. I still just want to lay out kind of like my view of Jabari. This is kind of the vision. How he played tonight is the vision for Jabari Smith Jr. What I certainly hoped for when I, saw him play. A guy who could, saw him pre-draft is a guy who's 6'10", 6'11", can switch, can defend multiple players. And I wrote it down, but I don't have it here anymore because I apparently accidentally closed it. But he went straight from, he hit shots tonight, but it was more than that. Like he was switching, he was guarding bigs, smalls, Zion, and just praised his overall defense. This is what he needs to do. It's not that he has to put the ball on the floor, cross people up, go around screens and create for everybody. Yes, that'd be nice. But for Jabari, he's got to be this kind of defender and this kind of shooter more often. And he was playing really well before like you said, before the bottom fell out. I think he was around 50% from three for the 6 games before this thing just cratered. And so it's frustrating. I'm really happy to see him have a game like this. It's long overdue. And hopefully this starts to build. But you know what? People have to be aware he's going to have another game where he shoots 4 for 15, and you're just going to have to be patient and look at the big picture when this thing's, all said and done. I want to talk about Reed. I want to talk about Amen too, because I don't want to overlook Amen. Amen tonight, 10 of 14 from the field, and led the team in plus minus at plus 21, had 6 assists, did have a late turnover that really bothered me, but otherwise he had 6 assists to 1 turnover before that late one that was like, oh, what are you doing, Amen? And 8 boards as well, played 40 minutes. Thought Amen was really good in this game. Reed, of course, is that lightning rod, but everyone's going to want to talk about Reed Sheppard. He came in, hit some shots, and you're like, great. Matter of fact, I was looking at this, and I think he was 3 for 4 and had hit 2 threes and was like minus 12 right out of like early. And I'm like, how did that happen? Because that's usually the opposite of what happens with Reed. Finished tonight, 17 and a half minutes, minus 14, but 11 points, 3 of 7 from 3. He had the turnovers, which I thought was bigger issue than the defense. What did you see from Reed? Did you draw anything necessarily from what we saw tonight?
Well, I think he was also hurt by the decision to start Steven Adams, because I do think that Reed's a guy who benefits disproportionately from having Steven out there. Like everybody benefits from Steven because generally he wins his minutes, but Reed specifically because of the screen setting and the Rockets opting to start the double big for the first time in a while. I think that was a change up that it's a situation where without Tari, the Rockets, I think, just wanted to play their 5 best guys and figure out everything else later. And if Tari's unavailable, Steven is clearly one of your 5 best. And it largely worked. They got off to a good start in this game, but then the bench couldn't sustain it because there just wasn't the firepower with the guys they're missing, and without Steven's availability to set the screens and to help get Reed going. He did get going later in the game, and it really helped in the fourth quarter when DFS had that flurry and scored all 8 of his points. Besides making a 3, he also attacked the closeouts a lot better tonight than he had in his first couple of weeks back. I thought he was moving a lot more fluidly, which is a good sign.
8 points has got to be a rocket high, right? For DFS? I haven't looked, but I mean, it's got to be.
I'm pretty sure it is.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just think a lot of it was a byproduct of not having Tari and moving Steven to the starting lineup. I mean, I don't think it was necessarily a terrible game for Reed, or not as bad as the plus minus might indicate. I just think it was largely circumstances and just a continuation of, we've talked about it in recent shows. He just hasn't been quite the same guy for the last month or so. I wouldn't say this was, particularly bad, but it's nothing too new. It's more of the same, and hopefully, he hit a couple of shots down the stretch. Hopefully that helps get him going.
It's got to be a Kogi that starts on Tuesday, right? Against the Spurs.
I would think so.
They're going to throw a Kogi at Wemby a la Dillon and try to make his life hell. That's my guess, yeah.
And even when Reed had it going, that game in San Antonio earlier this year, he was picked on so much down the stretch defensively. So I can't see Ime doing that, no.
Yeah. Yeah, Reed. It's so tough because it's a development. We've talked about this before, so I'm not going to go way deep into it again. It's a development versus a winning now thing, and I think some people are saying, and they may be right. I'm not saying they're wrong, but some people are saying, well, it's actually, look at the numbers. You're winning now by playing Reed. So somewhere these two things are going to merge, and maybe soon. But you can tell that there's still that balance for Ime on the trusting of Reed on DFS. We talked about this and drew the parallels in the past to to Steven Adams when he, was brought on with the Rockets and was looking pretty rusty. I remember some people thinking, okay, Adams is washed, but just had to get that strength and everything back and then rolled. I'm hoping DFS is that way. He's starting to gain more strength, shake off the rust. 3 of 5 tonight, did hit a triple, cut 3 boards, 8 points. He's going to obviously be a key member of the rotation, at least we think, assuming the Rockets are sticking to this plan with the trade deadline looming. But Ime talked about this afterwards. We're going to get Tari back, which is another thing I want to ask you about, Ben. And then DFS is getting more strength. We hope to have a full complement of defensive guys, but he specifically cited the ability 1 through 5 to switch. So I think you're going to see more Jabari at the 5 lineups overall.
And when you can run Amen Thompson at the point, who's averaging 20 points, 8 boards, 5 assists per game on like 62, 63% true shooting since the start of December, that's a 20-game sample. That type of length and athleticism across the board makes it so much easier to, if you're a little light or undersized at other spots, you can overcome it when you have a guy as your point guard. I know that'll rub people the wrong way, but he does at least start there. It just gives you so much flexibility when it comes to filling out the rest of your rotation. And I want to make sure we don't take Amen for granted, because if Amen, everything he's done since December 1st, if he had done that since the start of this season, he would be in the all-star conversations.
Yep.
He would legitimately be on the verge of being an all-star for the first time. He's been that good since December 1st. We haven't talked about it enough because the Rockets haven't won games at the rate we would like them to since December 1st. And so we're looking to talk more about what's going wrong rather than what's going right when you're in a stretch like what the Rockets have been in the last 6 weeks or so. But Amen is definitely a bright spot. And I think, assuming the record bounces back, and with a larger sample it should, I think Reed's a guy who in the second half of the year, people around the league are going to look at his numbers and just blink and say, wow, this is a really, really special player.
It's just a matter of time. He'll make the All-Star game here at some point. I believe that anyway. I think this guy's anyway. I think he's special. He's had some real bad games where you're like, okay, what in the world? But you can see so much potential in this guy. And he's starting to get more consistent with that mid-range shot, which is, believe it or not, improvement. The 3 is still very much work in progress, but a lot of good things happening with the men.
And from the first 20 games to the second 20, there's been clear improvement. That's what you want to see from your younger players. With the team losing at the rate it has this month, there's been a lot of big picture referendums. Well, here's a clear success story. Here's one of your talking young guys that is getting better week over week, month over month. So if we're going to point out the negatives, let's point out the positives as well. And this is something that, whether you want to credit Amen himself or the coaching staff, and it's probably a combination of the two, clearly this is trending in the right direction. And Dave, give me a minute. I've got to rant after that Texans game today, because it made me appreciate Ime Udoka a little bit. People get frustrated at times by, Ime showing some tough love, especially to the young guys, especially if it's, the stands that don't necessarily like the criticism when it's lobbed in the direction of their young guy. Well, I think the reason Ime does this, he wants them to face this adversity head on, so that when it's further down the road and you get to the playoffs, these guys have been through it before and they come out on the other side. One thing I'm not a huge fan of with the Texans and D'Amico Ryans, the relentless positivity. I think when you do ultimately get punched in the mouth, the way we saw CJ Stroud specifically today, it can be overwhelming. And I thought the body language on CJ Stroud's face, it looked to me like James Harden in the 2017 playoffs. Like he didn't even want to be out there. And I think it's the opposite, in my opinion, of the Ime Udoka approach, which is, it's tough love, but with the hope of getting them to the other side. so that they are mentally tough and ready to take on these situations. And, I'm not going to say last year was a clear success because they did lose in the playoffs to the Warriors, but they did get better as that series progressed. They fell down 3-1. They got their feet wet. They won game 5, won game 6. Game 7, I think they largely just ran out of talent against a Warriors team that had, proven veteran high-level difference makers in Steph, Jimmy, and Draymond. And the Rockets didn't have KD yet. I don't think there's any shame in losing in 7 the way it went down. But I did think as the series progressed, they showed some mental fortitude. And I think that's ultimately what Ime's trying to do. It's not that he's trying to pick on these guys. It's just, he shows them some tough love. And then as we saw with, Jabari tonight, Amen the last 6 weeks or so, that eventually they'll come out on the other side and that they'll be better for the experience. And so I think, I'm certainly not victory lapping the Ime Udoka approach because the Rockets have not won at a high level either, but I understand what he's trying to do. He's trying to make these guys mentally tougher so that when it gets to April and May, these guys aren't overwhelmed. They've been through the struggles before, and they can call upon these experiences and know that, hey, we just got to play through it and don't have the deer in the headlights look that we saw from CJ Stroud today. Not saying for sure it's going to work out that way, but that's the hope.
What a tough, I mean, I haven't seen a situation like this where if a team wins, I mean, they're not a surefire win over the Broncos, but to lose such a valuable player like Bo Nix to an ankle, a serious ankle injury, just the opportunity to go to the Super Bowl was really right there. That's a really painful loss. Watched the whole thing today, and it was tough to take. Let me ask you about Tari before we go into the tail stretch here. Tari, this is game number 40 this year for the Rockets, and Tari's missed 19 of them. So he's basically missed, half the season. We thought he'd be back for OKC, but that was speculation. Didn't happen. Then he was questionable for the Minnesota game. Second one, we thought for sure he's going to play there. Didn't, which was a shock. But then he's questionable for this one. Thought, oh, absolutely, he's playing this one. Didn't. He's out for this one. I mean, maybe they're just saying, well, this was the Pelicans. We feel better about playing him against and giving a couple more days to play against the Spurs. If he doesn't play against the Spurs with 2 questionable designations in the last 2 games, I don't know what to think. I'm just curious your thoughts on this. This is not the first time we've seen this with Tari, where it looks like he's going to play and then no, he's not ready yet. The leg and yeah, it's just interesting.
So I will say Steven Adams and Alperen Sengun coming back from their own ankle sprains earlier this month, it's a bit of a cautionary tale. Steven just re-injured the same ankle, it sounds like, and Sengun came back and he wasn't quite himself those first couple of games in terms of just the overall freedom of movement and the fluidity near the rim. He just didn't look as springy to me as he typically is. So I think that's a little bit of a cautionary tale when you try and bring these guys back too soon. And I actually wasn't that surprised tonight. I was very surprised he didn't play against Minnesota, but once they sat him that one, I said, hey, you've got to trust that you can beat the Pelicans at home, steal a couple more days, and try to bring him back against the Spurs. So I'm not too worried. Ankles are tricky. And, Sengun said in one of his interviews last week, he's still not 100%. The ankle is still affecting him. Those are injuries that linger, and you need a longer time frame than the NBA calendar typically allows. It's just, especially if you are as important to winning as Sengun and Steven Adams are for the Rockets, you try and expedite that timetable. Steven came back even earlier because that's when Sengun was dealing with the calf. No. So the Rockets were really in a tight spot, and they want to make sure that they don't do the same thing with Tari. But yeah, nonetheless, missing half the season, I've said before, I think 60 games is a big number. If he's below 60 again, even if it's different injuries, even if it's fluky and it's not the leg for the most part, it's not what he's dealt with in the past, the sample just isn't going to be there for him to get the type of contract that he'll want next offseason. Because even if the numbers are there, even if the 3-point shooting does hold for the most part, people are going to say, well, you need to show that you can do it over a longer sample, that you can stay out there, and that the production's not going to drop off. If Jabari didn't play this month because he was hurt, he would have never fallen off, and the stats would be exactly where they were 3 weeks ago.
Yeah, right.
That's part of what happens when you play more games. You have more opportunities to go through a downstretch, like we saw with Jabari, like we've seen with Reed the last month. That's part of, a full season sample. 82 games is really long. And so it's nothing, he had that brief issue with the lower leg when he was ramping up from the oblique that was concerning. This seems pretty fluky, so I'm not too concerned about it in the big picture. But I mean, if he's below 60 games, unless the Rockets have a a really deep playoff run, and maybe they will, and that'll, that would certainly boost the sample to a more representative amount. But without that, I mean, yeah, it probably will impact his market just because the sample's not going to
Yeah.
be large enough for people to fully buy in on whatever the data shows.
And we're going to talk about real quickly the Spurs game before we close up, but I want to ask you because Bima, David Weiner, and I, the last game, talked about trade deadline a little bit, and Tari as well. Do you see? And I know some people would think this would absolutely be, just a curse or something to do something like this. But could you see them trading Tari, given that we don't know some of the stuff that happens behind the scenes as far as contract and all that?
I personally would be surprised just because I don't think there's going to be enough value for that to be worthwhile. I Because of the sample we're talking about, he's literally missed half the season. I would be very surprised if there's a deal out there with more upside than simply keeping Tari and hoping that he's able to put it together down the stretch of this season and be a valuable rotation player, a 3-and-D guy for you in the playoffs. You can't write it off because of the contractual uncertainty, but I just think at this point there's going to be greater upside for the Rockets in staying the course, rolling the dice that he's able to stay healthy and put it together. And at this point, the Rockets have to think upside when you have a 37-year-old Kevin Durant and you're trying to win a championship this season.
Absolutely. This is, we already just saw OKC in Minnesota. This one was kind of more the break. You've got Spurs on Tuesday, which is huge here in Houston. You're going to go on the road, play Philly, go on the road and play Detroit, which has given the Rockets problems lately. You're going to have the Grizzlies here at home. Then you're going to play the Spurs again here in Houston. So they've got a 5-game stretch here that's quite challenging. But just as we close up, your thoughts on Tuesday's game, Wemby, that whole matchup. It's kind of interesting. I know some people kind of make it a Wemby versus Sengun thing. They don't really guard each other. I think Wemby guards Sengun maybe more lately. So it's not really like the old, Akeem Ewing kind of clash. It's much different. I expect Okogie to be on Wemby a lot, and obviously some switching. But I'm curious your thoughts on that matchup with the Spurs having just beat Minnesota with Anthony Edwards the day after the Rockets Timberwolves matchup.
Yeah, relative to that first meeting in November, you need KD to be much more crisp in his decision making. I think he had 7 or 8 turnovers that first time against the Spurs. Those were killers. And then beyond that, against a high level team, I think you're going to need your young guys with upside as creators to have big nights. Amen Thompson, Reed, Sheppard. The reason you had a chance in that first game, now I know he got picked on down the stretch defensively, but the first 42 minutes, Reed made some really tough shots against the Spurs. That was when he was at his best in November. If you can tap into that version of Reed going up against, people are always comparing Reed to Steph Castle, maybe that gets him going. It's a matchup where I think you need the ability to get off shots in tight spaces, and that's something that Reed can do. And it'll also be a challenge for Amen. I thought that first game against the Spurs, Amen got very timid after he had a shot blocked by Wemby. I can't remember exactly what quarter it was. I want to say it was midway through, but it just felt like to me watching live, he got very tentative from that point forward, and he didn't attack the paint. And this Rockets team, we've talked about the difference the last 6 weeks having this version of Amen, the 28-5 type guy on top efficiency. He can't get scared because Wemby's in the paint. He's got to keep attacking, trust that the whistle is going to be there. And if he gets a shot or two blocked because, Wemby's Wemby, okay, tip your hat. He's going to do that. He's a freak. Just trust your own ability. And so to me, it's just a game where you need KD to be KD, to be more crisp with the decision making, not turn the ball over, especially the live ball turnovers like he did in San Antonio. But then, a high level game, national TV, everybody's going to be dialed in. It's going to be tougher for your role players to win you the game. You need your young guys with upside, and I'm looking largely at Amen and Reed to have breakthroughs, to go make plays off the dribble, attacking downhill in the case of Amen, with Reed making shots in tight spaces from 30 feet, if that's what it takes. This is a game where you need to lean on the upside from Amen Thompson and Reed Sheppard, and hopefully they're able to step up.
Big game for the West standing. Spurs are 29-13. They're second behind the Thunder. And the Rockets are 2 back of them in the loss column. Rockets currently 5th seed. They're ahead of LA. They're technically a half game behind the Timberwolves.
But one less loss.
Exactly. They have 15 losses to the Timberwolves 16.
The
So
Nuggets
it's
now have 14 losses, by the way. They lost tonight to the Hornets. So
is it final? Because they were getting
yeah, they're
obliterated
down
by the
as
Hornets.
of our recording. They're down 23 with 6 minutes left. So I'm going to say
Okay.
it's final.
Yeah, it's probably a very, very safe bet. And I don't know when they're getting Jokic back, but that's a surprise to see that. So it's really tight in there. So if the Nuggets lose, they'll be 29-14. So the Rockets will be one back of them in the loss column. This is a big game in the West. So looking forward to it. We will be back for that game. Anything, Ben, you want to say before we close up?
No, that's pretty much it. Looking forward to Tuesday. That's going to be first matchup in Houston between the Spurs and Rockets. Spurs always have a big fan presence for these, so hopefully the Rockets fans are on time, because nothing would be more embarrassing than having it feel like 50-50 in an NBC game from Houston. So please, Rockets fans, be on time, be loud.
Yeah, and no Wemby posters, please, as far as getting postered. But appreciate it, Ben. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. Appreciate it. Let us know your thoughts on the comments. Anything ranging from how you like the show structure or don't like the show structure, or anything about the Rockets. By all means, we welcome all feedback. So love to hear from you. Appreciate everybody for tuning in, and we will see you guys Tuesday night. Thanks, everyone.